I think a lot about the people who have shaped me, not just the ones I've known personally, but the ones I've studied from a distance. Rock stars, musicians, philosophers, icons whose work found me at exactly the right moment and left a permanent mark. There's a particular kind of relationship you build with someone you've never met, an intimacy that lives entirely in the space between their work and your life. And over time, the best of them don't just entertain you, they guide you. I've learned to lean into that. When I need direction, I find it useful to channel the aura of someone I admire, to ask what their version of courage or discipline or creativity looked like, and let that become a kind of compass for my own moment. It's not imitation. I keep all of my own individual traits, my own voice, my own history, my own contradictions. It's more like I reconfigure the positive influences they've had on me and add my own modern touch. That's when a specific word comes to mind. Neo. Neo means new. A new school of thought built on previous ideas, previous influences, previous peoples and philosophies, updated, personalized, made your own. It's a prefix that acknowledges where something came from while claiming the right to carry it forward differently. Take Eastern philosophy, for example. I've found enormous resonance in Taoism, in Confucianism, in Buddhism. These traditions have shaped how I think about patience, about the nature of the self, about how to move through the world with intention rather than force. But I can't call myself a Taoist in any traditional sense. The full architecture of any one philosophy, its rituals, its orthodoxy, its history, that's not exactly mine to claim wholesale. What I can say is that I'm a neo-Taoist, a neo-Buddhist, a neo-Confucianist, someone who draws from these wells with genuine respect for where they come from, while piecing together the concepts that resonate most and weaving them into something that actually fits the life I'm living. This is what I think most thoughtful people are doing, whether they have a name for it or not. Taking from the philosophers, the artists, the teachers, the icons, not blindly, not wholesale, but selectively, carefully, with their own particular needs in mind. Building a personal philosophy from parts rather than inheriting one complete. The word neo matters to me precisely because it doesn't erase what came before. It honors the source. It says, I know where this came from, I know who built this, and I'm taking it somewhere new. There's a kind of creative freedom in that. The freedom to borrow across traditions, across eras, across disciplines, without needing to belong entirely to any one of them. To let a rock star's philosophy of performance inform how you approach your work. To let an ancient Stoic's practice of reflection show up in how you start your morning. To find the through lines between things that were never meant to be connected, and make something new from the intersection. That's what the prefix unlocks. Neo. New but rooted. Original, but not without origin. So I'll ask you, whose influence is already in you, shaping how you think and move without you always realizing it? And what would it look like to take that influence somewhere entirely your own? There's a particular kind of pressure that shows up when you don't fit neatly into a category. The world has a way of asking you to declare yourself, to name your tribe, your tradition, your lane, and stay in it. And if your answer is something complicated, something assembled from many sources rather than inherited whole, people sometimes don't quite know what to do with that. I've felt that pressure, the pull toward a clean label, toward saying, yes, I'm this, fully, simply, without qualification. It would be easier in certain ways, easier to explain at a dinner table, easier to find your people, easier to have a ready answer when someone asks what you believe. But I've made a different choice. I've chosen to live as a neo-something, a person whose identity isn't a single fixed point, but a considered constellation, drawn from many sources, held together by my own judgment about what is true and useful and worth carrying. And what I've found is that this requires a particular kind of confidence. because living outside a ready-made category means you're constantly constructing the thing yourself. There's no institution behind you, no community handing you the answers pre-sorted. You have to do the work of deciding what you actually believe, and keep doing it as you change and as the world changes around you. That's harder than inheriting a worldview. But it's also more honest, at least for me, because the alternative, adopting a philosophy wholesale, performing a tradition you only partially believe, that's its own kind of compromise. And I'd rather carry a smaller set of things I actually mean than a larger set of things I'm supposed to mean. What I've noticed is that living as a neo-something keeps you permanently curious. When your identity isn't fixed to a single tradition, you stay open to influence. A conversation, a book, an unexpected encounter can still move something in you, still add to or refine what you believe, because you haven't closed the system. You've left the door open on purpose. There's a concept I keep returning to here. The idea that originality is never really created from nothing. Every original thinker was shaped by what came before them. Every artist you admire was somebody else's devoted student first. The neo-identity doesn't pretend otherwise. It names the influences, honors them, and then asks, what do I do with this now, in my own life, in my own time? The prefix neo doesn't mean abandoning the past. It means being in honest conversation with it, taking what resonates, leaving what doesn't, and accepting responsibility for the synthesis. That last part matters, because when you build your own framework, you can't outsource the accountability. What you believe is yours. The choice to keep believing it, or to revise it, is always yours. There's a kind of freedom in that which I've come to deeply value, and a kind of weight, too. But I'd take both over the comfort of a borrowed identity that was never quite mine to begin with. So I'll ask you, is there a label you've been carrying that someone else handed you? And if you set it down for a moment and looked at what's actually underneath it, what would you find that's genuinely yours? The inner language. I grew up with two languages. One took over. The other one retreated, quietly, without announcement, until it existed somewhere deep in my subconscious, present but unreachable. And the strange thing is, I can still understand it when it's spoken. I hear it and something in me responds, recognizes it, follows the meaning without effort. But when I try to speak it back, the machinery isn't there. It's as if my mind began learning the language as a child, got as far as receiving it, understanding it, and then stopped before it ever learned to generate it. The words never made it from the inside out. I carry a quiet sadness about that sometimes. A language half learned is a whole world half entered. And yet, my mind found other ways, different ways of working with language that I've come to find just as fascinating, maybe more. Throughout my childhood, my formative years, I would always create new words in my mind, words that don't exist in any language, an internal vocabulary entirely my own. When I encountered an emotion I couldn't immediately name, I would reach inward and find a sound for it, a construction of syllables that felt right, that carried the weight of what I was feeling in its shape and its texture. Same with concepts. Ideas that were too specific or too layered for existing words to hold cleanly. My mind would simply make one. It's fascinating to sit with that, because every word that exists in every language came from somewhere. Someone made it up. Someone reached for a sound that could carry a meaning, and eventually other people agreed, and the word spread and settled into common use. The words in a dictionary are just the ones that made it. There are countless others that were thought but never spoken, felt but never named, invented and then forgotten. My mind has its own set of these, words that don't exist anywhere else, that could exist, I think, if I spoke them out loud more often, if I gave them enough air. Lately, I've been making it a goal to keep a glossary of them, a private record of my internal vocabulary, what the words are, what they mean to me, where they came from. Because I think there's something genuinely liberating about not limiting myself to words that can be found in a dictionary. Language is alive. It bends and shifts and expands constantly. New words enter it every year, and old words change their meanings over decades. And the boundaries of what is a real word have always been more permeable than any dictionary suggests. Knowing that makes it feel less like trespassing and more like participating in something that was always meant to grow. I pay close attention to the elements that make a word work. The sounds, the rhythm, the way certain combinations of syllables feel in the mouth or land on the ear. Some of the words I've created are more pleasing to me than the conventional ones they stand alongside, more precise, more mine. And that's exactly why you might notice titles on this channel that feel somewhat invented, because sometimes they are, named from the inside out, the same way all words were once. So I'll ask you, is there a feeling, a state of mind, an experience you've had repeatedly in your life that you've never quite found the right word for? Something that exists in you that language hasn't caught up to yet? Sound and meaning. Before a word means anything, it sounds like something. That's easy to forget when you've been speaking a language your whole life, when words arrive already loaded with meaning, already familiar, already doing their job before you've even finished hearing them. But strip all of that away. Go back to the raw material, just the sound. And you start to notice that certain sounds carry a feeling in themselves, independent of any meaning they've been assigned. There's a whole field of linguistics built around this idea. The question of whether sounds have inherent emotional weight, whether the shape a word makes in your mouth tells you something about what it is before your brain has processed its definition. And my own experience suggests yes. Quietly, unmistakably, yes. When I create a word, when I reach inward for a sound that can hold a feeling I haven't named yet, I'm not choosing randomly, I'm listening. There's a kind of internal audition happening, where different sound combinations are tried against the feeling, and most of them don't fit, and then occasionally one does. Not because I decided it fit, because it felt like it fit. The sound arrived, and the feeling recognized it. Certain consonants feel hard and definitive. Others feel soft and unresolved. Long vowels carry a different emotional weight than short ones. The way a word ends, whether it closes sharply or trails into silence, changes what it leaves behind in the ear. These aren't rules I follow consciously when I'm building a word. They're instincts, and I've come to trust them more than I might have once. What I find most interesting is that this isn't unique to invented words. It applies to existing ones too. Some real words in real languages feel wrong to me for what they're supposed to mean, the sound at odds with the concept, like a door that doesn't quite fit its frame. And others feel so precisely right that it's almost hard to believe they were arbitrary, that no one designed them to sound exactly like what they are. This is part of why I've expanded or redefined certain words for my own use. The sound was already appealing to me, already doing something right, but the meaning felt incomplete, or too narrow, or pointed in a direction that wasn't quite where I needed it to go. So I adjusted the meaning to fit the sound, or I kept the meaning and built a new sound around it. The relationship between the two feels collaborative to me, sound and meaning in negotiation with each other, neither one fully fixed. Language at its most live has always worked this way. Children do it naturally before anyone teaches them the rules. Poets do it deliberately, bending sound to carry more than definition alone can hold. And somewhere between those two, in that space where instinct and intention meet, is where the most interesting words come from. The ones that feel inevitable once you hear them. The ones that make you think, of course, how was there ever a world without this word? So I'll ask you, is there a word in any language whose sound has always felt slightly wrong to you for what it means, or one that feels so precisely right it almost seems designed?
Janothra. There's a word that has lived in my mind for years. It didn't come from a book or a teacher or a conversation. It simply appeared, the way certain things do when they've been forming in the subconscious long enough to finally surface. The word is Janothra. I couldn't tell you where it came from. And for a long time, I couldn't tell you exactly what it meant, which is a strange thing to admit about a word that's entirely my own creation. But that was the nature of it. I had a vague sense of its meaning, a feeling in the vicinity of it without being able to pin it down precisely. So it stayed, present but undefined, returning whenever it wanted, apparently patient enough to wait until I caught up to it. And now I finally have. Janathra refers to balance, life balance in all its forms. I close my eyes and visualize it, and it appears in many different expressions simultaneously. Work and rest, body and mind, logic and emotion, the spiritual and the practical, each pair a different scale, all of them calibrating toward the same center. What strikes me about this is that the word existed in me before the definition did, which tells me something. It tells me that balance isn't just a concept I think about. It's something I've been reaching for subconsciously maybe my entire life. The mind created a word for it because it needed one, because it was tracking something important that didn't yet have a name. Balance is stable. That's why I keep returning to it. In a life that moves fast and pulls in many directions at once, stability isn't something that just happens. It has to be sought, maintained, returned to when it slips. And the seeking of it is almost never dramatic. It's quiet, incremental, an ongoing negotiation between all the different parts of life that each want more than their share. I think about work-life balance and how that phrase has become so common it's almost lost its texture. But when I hold it inside the word Janathra, it becomes something else, something more personal and more felt. A reminder that work is only one chamber of a much larger structure, and if that one chamber floods, the others are affected. The whole thing lists. The spiritual dimension of balance is the one I find most elusive. It's easy enough to adjust a schedule, to carve out time, to make the visible parts of a life more symmetrical. But the interior balance, between what you believe and how you live, between who you are and who you're becoming, that one requires a different kind of attention, a slower, more honest kind. Janathra, to me, is the word that holds all of it. The whole aspiration of living a life where no part of you is being entirely neglected, where the various selves you carry, the working self, the resting self, the seeking self, the body, the mind, the spirit, all are getting something of what they need. A word for something I've been chasing without always knowing I was chasing it, which is maybe the truest kind of word there is. So I'll ask you, if you had to name the one area of your life that most consistently falls out of balance, the one that never quite gets what it needs, what would it be?
The practice of Janathra, knowing the word is one thing. Living it is something else entirely. Janathra, balance, isn't a destination you arrive at and then stay. I've had to make peace with that. It's more like a compass bearing than a fixed point, something you orient toward, correct toward, return to, knowing the drift will happen again and the correction will be needed again, indefinitely. That's the practice. For a long time, I think I approached balance the wrong way, treating it like a problem to be solved once, a configuration to achieve and then maintain without further effort. And every time something shifted and the equilibrium broke, it felt like a failure, like I'd lost something I was supposed to hold on to. But the shift is inevitable. Life changes weight constantly. A season of intense work throws one side of the scale down. A period of grief or recovery pulls everything inward. A creative surge fills certain chambers while others go quiet. This isn't imbalance, it's life being alive. The question is whether you're paying attention to it, whether you notice the tilt before it becomes lean and the lean before it becomes a collapse. What I've found is that actively pursuing Janathra looks less like achieving perfect symmetry and more like developing a certain quality of attention, an ongoing awareness of which parts of your life are being fed and which are running low, which relationships are getting something real and which ones are surviving on maintenance, which parts of yourself are engaged and which have gone quiet for longer than they should have. The body is usually the most honest signal. It registers imbalance before the mind is willing to acknowledge it, in the quality of sleep, in a persistent tension that shows up somewhere specific, in the strange flatness that descends when the creative self has been ignored too long. I've learned to read those signals rather than override them. They're not complaints, they're information. The spiritual dimension of Janathra requires a different kind of tending. It doesn't announce itself with physical symptoms. It shows up as a subtle drift, a growing gap between the values you hold and the choices you're actually making, between the person you're trying to become and the person your daily habits are quietly building. When I notice that gap widening, that's usually the clearest sign that something in the interior balance needs attention. I've also come to think that pursuing Janathra requires regular solitude, periods of genuine quiet where you can actually hear which parts of your life are speaking and which ones have gone silent. It's difficult to calibrate anything in constant noise. The recalibration happens in the pauses. None of this is a system. It's more like a relationship with your own life, your own needs, your own rhythms. One that requires showing up consistently, paying honest attention, and being willing to make adjustments even when they're inconvenient, even when one part of you would just rather keep going the way it's been going. Janathra isn't the balance you achieve, it's the practice of always moving back toward it. So, I'll ask you, what signal has your life been sending you lately that you may have been too busy to actually stop and listen to?
Futurism. Sometimes I close my eyes and I channel voices from the future. It takes a little concentration to get there, to quiet the noise of the present long enough to hear them. But once I've begun, it's actually not so hard. They're not far. The voice I hear most clearly is my own. Older, more settled. A version of me that has carried everything I am today, all the knowledge, all the thoughts I've had, but refined them over years into something cleaner, something more fully realized. That's my future self, and I find it genuinely useful to visit him. I ask myself where I might be in 5 years. I'm not a fortune teller, I know that, but I can channel something. I can envision myself somewhere real, even if the details are still forming. Taking more trips, better time management, routines that finally reflect who I actually want to be. A life that has moved, even incrementally, closer to the one I'm imagining now. What I've learned is that the vision isn't the hard part. The hard part is the space between here and there. All the small steps, all the days where the distance feels the same as it did yesterday. Really sticking with it, having the discipline to keep moving toward a destination even when progress is invisible, even if it might take years. That's where channeling these voices, this vision of a future self, becomes more than just a pleasant thought. It becomes a compass, a reason to keep going. I want to say something about futurism, because the word sometimes carries weight it doesn't deserve. It can sound daunting. For some people, it induces a kind of anxiety, all the uncertainty, all the things that can't be controlled, all the ways the future can feel like a threat. I understand that. But that's not what I mean when I think about it. Futurism shouldn't be a daunting feeling. If anything, it should be a feeling that's thrilling, exciting, and one that evokes enthusiasm. That's what I think of when I bring my thoughts to futurism. It's also something that helps me cope with the past, with things I can't change, with chapters that are closed whether I want them to be or not. The future doesn't erase those things, but it gives them a different relationship to the present. Because today is the only thing I actually have that can affect all of my tomorrows. And that's a kind of power. A quiet, significant power that's easy to overlook if you're spending too much time looking backwards. I'm genuinely excited for what's coming. The technology is still in development, the tools that haven't been invented yet that will reshape how I work, how I create, how I think. The discoveries that are waiting to be made by all of us, individually in our own time and in our own way. It feels wonderful to live in the future, even a little, to let your mind travel there and return with something, a sense of direction, a feeling of momentum, the particular kind of hope that comes from knowing the story isn't finished. So, I'll ask you, when you close your eyes and imagine yourself 5 years from now, what's the first thing you see that makes you feel something? And what's the one thing standing between you and that version of yourself that you know, honestly, you could start addressing today?
The past is not the destination. There's a particular way the past can grip you. Not always loudly. Sometimes it's just a weight you carry without quite realizing how heavy it's gotten. Decisions you've second-guessed so many times they've worn grooves in your thinking. Chapters you keep returning to even though the pages haven't changed. I know that weight. And I've found that one of the most powerful things Futurism does for me is loosen that grip. Gradually, without forcing anything, simply by giving me somewhere more interesting to look. The past is fixed. That's the essential fact of it. Everything that happened is exactly as it happened, permanently, without appeal, without revision. And for a long time, I related to that fact as a kind of sentence, like the past was a verdict on what was possible for me going forward. But the present moment doesn't work that way. Today is the only thing I actually have that can affect all of my tomorrows. Not yesterday. Yesterday is already behind the glass. Today, this hour, the choice I make in the next few minutes, that's the only lever that actually moves anything. And when I understood that, really understood it, not just as a phrase, but as something I felt, the past started to feel like something different, less like a verdict, more like context. Futurism became a kind of forgiveness for me. Not a forgetting, I'm not interested in that, and I don't think it works anyway, but a reorientation, a decision to let the past be what it is, informative, instructive, finished, and to put the weight of my attention on what's still open, what's still possible, what the version of me 5 years from now is going to look back on this moment and be grateful I chose. There's something clarifying about that last thought. Imagining a future self looking back at today changes what today looks like. Suddenly the small choices carry more weight. The habit you either build or don't, the conversation you either have or avoid, the creative work you either begin or keep postponing. Seen from the future, those things are significant. From inside the present, they can feel anything but. I think a lot of people stay oriented toward the past because it's known. Even when it's painful, it's familiar. The future is open, and open means uncertain, and uncertain can feel dangerous. But I've come to experience that openness differently. The future being unwritten is exactly what makes it worth thinking about. It means nothing is settled yet. It means the next chapter is genuinely up for grabs. And that, honestly, is one of the more exciting things I know. The past gave me what it gave me. Some of it I'd change if I could, some of it I wouldn't touch. All of it got me here, to this moment, to this version of myself that is still in motion, still forming, still heading somewhere. And the future is where I choose to live. So I'll ask you, is there something in your past that you've been treating like a verdict on your future? And what would change if you decided today to treat it as context instead?